You don't remember me, do you, Mr. Elias? Elias? Someone has come from the place, Elias. But I remember you every single day. Elias sat in the gleaming hospital room, the sterile smell sharp in his nose. He was a man used to commanding, to barking orders that were instantly obeyed. His life had been built on a foundation of absolute control, particularly over those he deemed beneath him. For years, he had employed workers from distant lands, their lives and livelihoods held precariously in his hands. He saw them not as people, but as tools, easily replaced, their needs secondary to his own convenience and profit. Their passports, their very freedom, were often kept locked away in his office, a tangible symbol of his power. He had dismissed their pleas, ignored their suffering, convinced that his wealth and status made him untouchable, immune to the consequences of his actions. He believed his way was the only way, that power justified everything, and that the past, especially the past of those he had exploited, could never touch him. Before continuing, if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Years ago, in a large, air-conditioned office, Elias sat behind a wide desk. The light from the window caught the expensive gold watch on his wrist as he picked up a stack of passports. He handled them like playing cards, flipping through the pages quickly. A man stood across from the desk, wringing his hands. His face was thin, his eyes wide with worry. "Please, sir," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. "My child is sick. I need my passport to go home." Elias did not look up. He took the man's passport and slid it into a deep drawer in his desk. The drawer already contained dozens of similar documents. "Problem?" Elias asked, his voice flat. A younger man, a subordinate, stood nearby, holding another stack of passports. He hesitated before handing them over. Elias snapped his head up, his eyes narrowing. "Problem?" he repeated. The subordinate quickly looked away, placing the passports on the desk. One of them was held in a simple, worn leather holder with the initials RK embossed on it. Elias tossed it aside with the others. He kicked the drawer shut with his foot. A muffled sob echoed from the hallway outside the office door. Elias adjusted the cuff of his expensive shirt, then his gold watch unaffected. In his opulent villa, years later, Elias paced the living room, a cane tapping impatiently on the marble floor. He was thinner now, his movements slower, but the arrogance still clung to him like a second skin. He stopped before a display case filled with gleaming gold watches. "Dust," he rasped, pointing a shaking finger. A maid, her eyes fixed on the floor, quickly stepped forward with a cloth. His wife entered the room, carrying a tray with tea. He waved her away without looking. The phone rang. Elias snatched it up. "Yes?" His face paled as he listened. "Not available here?" he barked into the receiver. The doctor's voice on the other end was calm, professional. "The treatment isn't available here. It requires specialized facilities." Elias's grip tightened on the phone. "The plastic casing cracked." "Where?" he demanded. "Singapore has the facilities," the doctor replied. Elias slammed the phone down. "Pack," he barked at his wife. "You're going to Singapore." She hesitated. "What about the workers' wages?" she asked softly. "They've been waiting." Elias scoffed. "They'll wait," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Their problems are not my problems." Later, at the airport departure lounge, his wife discreetly slipped some cash to a janitor who was pushing a cleaning cart nearby. The janitor, a man with tired eyes, nodded almost imperceptibly. Elias, busy barking orders at a porter, didn't notice. He stuffed his own passport and travel documents into his briefcase. Among them was the worn leather holder with the initials RK. "For paperwork," he muttered to himself, snapping the briefcase shut. They sat in a hospital waiting room in Singapore, the air cool and smelling faintly of disinfectant. Elias shifted impatiently on the hard plastic chair. A nurse with kind eyes was kneeling beside a small child who was crying softly, gently wiping the child's face. Elias glared at his watch. "How much longer?" he demanded, his voice raspy. "I have an appointment." The nurse looked up, her expression calm. "Sir," she said softly, "here, every life has equal weight. We see patients in order." Elias laughed, a dry hacking sound. He pulled out a thick wad of cash from his pocket. "Perhaps this will help speed things along," he said, fanning the money. The nurse simply stood up and walked away without a word. His wife covered her face with her hands. At the hospital administration office, Elias slammed his briefcase onto the counter. "I want this expedited," he announced. "I'll donate a wing to the hospital if necessary." The clerk behind the counter, a young woman with a name tag that read R. Kumar, looked at him impassively. "Sir," she said, her voice polite but firm, "approval for this procedure requires the signature of the Minister of Health." Elias stared at her. The minister? He was used to dealing with doctors and administrators, not government officials, for medical treatment. This was a complication he hadn't anticipated. As he stood there, frustrated, a man in a sharp suit approached him. He slid a business card across the counter towards Elias. "Trouble with delays?" the man said with a smooth smile. "For a fee? I specialize in expediting bureaucratic processes." Elias looked at the card, then at the man. He coughed. a deep, painful cough that left a red stain on the corner of the business card. The man's smile faltered for a brief second. Back in their hotel room, the man, the fake ally, spread papers on the table. The minister's office is particular, he said, tapping a pen on a form. Connections are key. Elias sat counting stacks of cash, his hands still trembling slightly. His wife watched from the edge of the bed, her face etched with worry. What if they ask questions? She asked quietly. About your business? About the past? Elias snapped his head up. Money is the answer, he said, his voice regaining some of its old force. Money opens every door. The next day, Elias stood in a long hallway outside an office at the ministry building. He clutched his briefcase, feeling a strange mix of impatience and unease. He saw a guard standing by a door down the hall. Elias approached him and discreetly slid a folded wad of cash into the guard's hand. The guard's eyes flickered down at the money, then back up at Elias. He pocketed the money, but simply pointed down the hallway towards a line of people waiting patiently on benches. Wait your turn, sir, the guard said, his expression unchanging. Elias stared at the line, then back at the guard, his face flushing with anger. He felt a sudden dizziness, his vision blurring at the edges. He stumbled slightly, clutching his chest, the hallway seeming to tilt around him. He leaned against the wall, gasping for air, the money in the guard's pocket feeling like a heavy weight. Elias pushed himself off the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The dizziness slowly faded, leaving behind a cold knot of fear in his stomach. He straightened his tie, trying to regain some semblance of his former composure, and walked towards the waiting area the guard had indicated. He sank onto a hard bench, clutching his briefcase, the leather worn and scuffed. A janitor was mopping the polished floor nearby. The rhythmic swish of the mop, a low, steady sound in the quiet hallway. Elias didn't look up, his eyes fixed on his hands, gripping the briefcase. The janitor's shoes paused in front of him, the worn rubber soles a stark contrast to Elias's expensive but now scuffed loafers. Elias finally glanced up, his eyes meeting the janitor's face for a brief second. There was no recognition there, just a tired indifference. Elias looked away, a wave of relief washing over him, quickly followed by renewed anxiety about the meeting. A moment later, the man from the hotel, the fake ally, rushed into the waiting area, his face flushed. Mr. Elias, good news, he said, his voice a little too loud. The minister will see you now. Just a slight adjustment. There was a complication. It will be double the fee. Elias stared at him, then at the door the man gestured towards. His hands trembled as he fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a thicker stack of cash. He pushed it into the fake ally's hand. Just get it done, Elias rasped. The fake ally's smile returned, wider this time. He pocketed the money quickly. Right this way, Mr. Elias, the fake ally said, leading him towards a large, imposing door at the end of the hall. Elias walked slowly, his legs feeling heavy. The fake ally opened the door and gestured inside. Elias stepped through the doorway. The room was vast, filled with light from floor to ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. A man stood silhouetted against the light, holding a file in his hand. Elias stepped forward, clearing his throat, a cough catching in his chest. The man in front of the window turned slightly. His face was calm, composed, but his eyes held a depth that Elias couldn't immediately place. The man spoke, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence of the room. You don't remember me, do you, Mr. Elias? He said softly. But I remember you every single day. Elias froze. The face almost game over. The voice. A cold dread began to spread through him. His hand, still clutching his gold watch, went numb. The watch slit from his wrist, hitting the polished marble floor with a sharp crack. The glass face shattered. The man, the minister, walked slowly to a large desk. On the desk, placed carefully, was a simple, worn leather passport holder with the initials RK embossed on it. The minister lifted it. You kept souvenirs? He asked, his eyes never leaving Elias's face. Wait, before I tell you what happened next, if you believe in facing the consequences of your actions, hit that like button and subscribe right now. His wife sat alone in a small chapel within the hospital complex. The air was cool and still, smelling of old wood and beeswax. She lit a thin candle, watching the small flame flicker. The compassionate nurse entered quietly, her footsteps soft on the stone floor. Your husband's case is unusual, the nurse said gently. His wife nodded, her eyes fixed on the flame. He wasn't always like this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The nurse sat beside her for a moment. People rarely are, she replied, her tone kind but knowing. His wife reached into her pocket, and her fingers closed around the worn leather passport holder. She had taken it from Elias's briefcase while he was asleep. A sudden, inexplicable urge guiding her hand. A memory flashed in her mind. Years ago, standing unseen in the hallway outside Elias's office, hearing the muffled stifled sobs, seeing a young man on his knees, begging for his passport back. She clutched her pendant, the cool metal pressing into her palm. She looked at the passport holder in her hand, then back at the flickering candle. She slipped the passport holder into the pocket of her simple dress, a quiet decision made. Back in his hospital room, Elias lay propped up on pillows, the IV drip beside his bed, making a soft, rhythmic sound like a slow, ticking clock. He grabbed his phone from the bedside table. "Get me Mr. Al-Nansori," he barked into the receiver. "Tell him Elias is calling." He waited, listening to the dial tone, then the ringing. No answer. He tried another number, then another. Each time, nothing. His connections were silent. The IV drip echoed the silence. Elias ripped the needle from his arm, a thin line of blood appearing. The door opened, and the fake ally entered, looking flustered. His suit slightly rumbled. "Mr. Elias, about the minister," he started. He asked some questions about your old business practices. Elias's eyes narrowed. "What did you tell him?" he demanded. "Just that you were a successful businessman, sir. Very successful," fake ally stammered. Elias grabbed a vase from the bedside table and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall. "Get out," he screamed, his voice hoarse. Fake ally scrambled back out the door. Later, Elias, feeling restless and suffocated in the room, stumbled out into a small hospital garden. He sat on a bench, breathing the humid air. Another patient, an older man with a hacking cough, sat nearby. The unsentimental truth teller. He wheezed, looking at Elias with clear, unimpressed eyes. "You're the one they're all whispering about," he said between coughs. Elias bristled. "I'm nobody's victim," he snapped. The man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Aren't we all?" he said. Elias felt a sudden, violent coughing fit seize him. He covered his mouth with his hand. When it passed, he looked at his palm. There was blood on it. The next day, Elias was called back to the minister's office. He sat across the wide desk from the minister, the silence heavy between them. The minister slid a file across the desk. It was Elias's medical file, thick with reports and scans, but tucked inside, between the pages, were photographs, not of medical images, but of faces. Tired faces, young faces, old faces, his former workers. "You documented everything," the minister said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Even there and now. Even there, a very, very specific long story. It's final. It's a dress of in how we meet, act, a very mundane sense of shape-shifting this mind thing." Expiration dates. Elias stared at the photos, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Those were just," he started. The minister cut him off. "Numbers," he finished, his eyes piercing. Elias's hand trembled as he reached for the file. The minister leaned forward slightly. "I was patient 0 in your ledger," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Just then, a nurse burst into the room, her face urgent. "Mr. Elias, your vitals. We need to prep you now. It's critical." The minister calmly closed the file. He looked at Elias, his expression unreadable. "I'll decide by morning," he said. That night, Elias lay in his hospital bed, the beeping of the monitors, a constant reminder of his precarious state. He needed the treatment. He needed the minister's approval. He needed it now. He managed to get out of bed and staggered down the corridor towards the bathroom, pushing his IV pole along. The janitor from earlier was buffing the floor nearby. He wore a ministry ID badge clipped to his shirt. The janitor stopped in front of Elias, wordlessly holding out something in his hand. It was Elias's gold watch. The glass face cracked. Elias took it, his hand shaking. He looked at his reflection in the broken glass, gaunt, diminished, a shadow of the man he once was. The janitor watched him for a moment, then turned back to his work. Further down the corridor, a commotion erupted. Security guards were escorting the fake ally out of the hospital, his protests muffled. "He sold your medical records," a nurse hissed to another, loud enough for Elias to hear. Elias saw his file on a gurney nearby, left open in the rush. He saw the words, "High risk, minister's discretion," stamped across the top page. Across town, in the ministry building, his wife rode up in the elevator with a minister's aide. "The minister is still reviewing the case," the aide said politely. "It's complex." He checked his watch. He mentioned a specific address. "RK's old dormitory." His wife froze. She recognized the address instantly. It was one of Elias's former labor camps. Her hand went to her pocket, gripping the passport holder. It slipped from her grasp, falling to the elevator floor. The aide bent down and picked it up. "Oh," he said, looking at the worn leather. "You kept this all these years?" Elias collapsed between supply shelves in a hospital storage room. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. It was over. The unsentimental truth teller found him there, slumped against a box. He shoved a folded newspaper into Elias's hand. "Read it," he wheezed. The headline was about the minister. Minister's speech much today. Justice for migrant workers. Elias looked at the date. It was tomorrow's date. The speech had already been given. The decision was already made. The truth teller tossed something small and metallic onto Elias's chest. A coin. A coin. The exact amount Elias had paid years ago for the minister's initial work visa application fee. Interest accrues, the truth teller said, then walked away, leaving Elias alone in the dim room, the coin heavy on his chest. Before continuing, with everything on the line, what choice would you make? Answer in the comments. At dawn, his wife found Elias on the hospital roof, gripping her pendant in his hand. The city skyline was beginning to glow with a rising sun. You knew, he accused, his voice raw. All this time, you knew who he was. She opened her palm. The worn leather passport holder lay there. Elias stared at it, then reached out a trembling hand. He opened it. Inside, faintly etched into the leather, were his own initials. He had marked all the confiscated passports with his initials. He stumbled back, a wave of nausea washing over him. He vomited over the railing, the bile bitter in his throat. The minister's voice echoed from the rooftop doorway, calm and clear. Sunrise in 10 minutes, he said. My decision stands. The gleaming towers of the city seemed to mock Elias, his former kingdom now dwarfed by the ministry building where his fate had been sealed. Later that morning, Elias knelt before the small candle in the hospital chapel, the same candle his wife had lit days before. The flame flickered steadily. The compassionate nurse entered the chapel quietly. Mr. Elias, she said softly. The minister's car just arrived. Elias looked up at her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cracked gold watch. He placed it carefully in the small offering box near the altar. The ticking stopped as the watch settled amongst the coins. The nurse's ID badge caught the light. Elias saw her last name. It was the same as the minister's. She was his niece. He remembered now. He had fired her mother years ago, a pregnant worker who had asked for leave. He asked for you first, the nurse said, her expression unreadable. Elias walked slowly down the hallway towards the minister's office, his legs weak, his body aching. He passed framed photos on the wall. The minister shaking hands with dignitaries, cutting ribbons, receiving awards. He saw a janitor buffing the floor, the same man from the waiting area, the man who had once cleaned his villa. The janitor paused, looked at Elias, and spat deliberately on the polished floor near his shadow. The security guard nearby chuckled softly. He remembers you, the guard said. At the door to the minister's outer office, his wife was being stopped by the minister's aide. I'm sorry, madam, the aide said. Conflict of interest. He needs to see Mr. Elias alone. The aide handed her a file. Inside, Elias saw later, were his old worker contracts. Next to the minister's name, the signature was a clumsy forgery. Elias was led into an antechamber to wait. A large clock on the wall ticked loudly, but the hands seemed to be moving backward. He sat beneath it, the sound echoing in the silent room. The compassionate nurse, the minister's niece, emerged from the inner office. He's reviewing your case, she whispered, her eyes meeting his briefly. With the passport holder on his desk, Elias's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He had fired her mother. He had marked the passport holder. Finally, the door to the inner office opened. Elias walked in. The minister sat behind his desk, calm and composed. The worn leather passport holder lay on the desk between them. The minister picked it up and slid it across to Elias. Open it, he said. Elias's trembling fingers fumbled with a clasp. He opened the holder. Inside was his own passport, stamped with a large red void. The minister watched him, then reached into a drawer. He pulled out a syringe, labeled with Elias's drug regimen. Your treatment has been adjusted, the minister said quietly. For the last 2 weeks, Elias stared at the syringe, then back at the minister. He had been poisoned, slowly, methodically. The minister pushed 2 forms across the desk, along with a pen, the same model Elias used to sign his business papers, the same model he had used to slash workers' salaries. Approval requires your signature, the minister said. One form was a medical consent for the life-saving procedure. The other was a detailed confession of labor abuses, passport confiscation, and wage theft, naming Elias explicitly. At a hospital discharge desk, his wife signed papers, her face pale and drawn. The clerk handed her a small box and Elias's gold watch, the cracked face still showing the wrong time. She opened the box. Inside lay the worn leather passport holder. She opened it. It contained Elias's death certificate and a single worn coin. The minister paid in full, the clerk said softly, gesturing to the hospital bill marked paid. His wife dropped the coin. It clattered on the tile floor and rolled towards the janitor who was buffing the floor nearby. The janitor bent down, pocketed the coin, and nodded almost imperceptibly at her. As she walked towards the exit, another patient arrived, wheeled in on a gurney, a wealthy man, barking orders at the orderlies, demanding special treatment. He wore cufflinks, identical to Elias's. The janitor watched him, his hand closing around the coin in his pocket.